It started with the idea of just getting away for a bit. Things had been piling up, work stress, bills, noise, everything. I'd been in front of screens for too long, surrounded by people too much, and I was feeling short-tempered and burned out. I didn't want to be around anyone, and I didn't want anyone around me. I just wanted to disappear for a few days, unplug, get back to something simple. I found this small cabin online. It was about a 5-hour drive from where I lived, buried deep in a forested area near an old lake that people said used to be a popular fishing spot back in the 70s, but hadn't seen much traffic since. It was perfect, quiet, remote, and cheap. I packed everything I thought I'd need. Food that wouldn't go bad, a couple gallons of water just in case, a hand crank flashlight, my old hunting knife, a sleeping bag even though the cabin claimed to have a bed, a few changes of clothes, a pair of boots, and some books. I didn't bring a gun. I didn't own one, and I figured it wasn't necessary. I wasn't planning on doing anything dangerous. I just wanted quiet. The drive up was uneventful but long. Once I got off the main roads and started following the GPS down the back trails, things got pretty rough. The road turned into a narrow dirt track with no signs, full of potholes and loose gravel. The trees pressed in tight on both sides like they were reclaiming the space. I saw maybe one other car the whole last hour of the drive. Eventually, the signal dropped out completely, and I was left following the last GPS directions I had saved. I found the cabin late in the afternoon. It was even smaller than the pictures made it look. Just a single-room structure with a small front porch, an old wood stove, and a metal roof. The paint was faded, some boards were warped, and the windows were dusty, but it looked solid enough. The door was unlocked, just like the owner said it would be, and inside everything was basic but functional. A small wooden table, a single bed with a mattress that looked clean, a shelf with some cookware and a few old books, and a counter with a camping-style propane stove. No running water, no bathroom, just an outhouse about 30 yards out behind the trees. The lake wasn't visible from the cabin, but I found a rough trail that led down to it. It was maybe a 10-minute walk. The first night was quiet. I built a fire in the little fire pit outside, heated up a can of chili, and watched the last light fade out behind the trees. It was colder than I expected once the sun dropped. The forest made all kinds of noises, branches creaking, small animals skittering, the occasional distant sound of something heavier moving around. I'd camped enough times to know most of it was harmless, but being alone that far out made every sound feel closer. Still, I got through the night without much trouble. I was tired from the drive, and the silence was what I came for. The next day, I walked down to the lake. It was bigger than I thought. The shoreline was choked with reeds in some places and rocky in others. There was a rotting old dock half sunk into the mud. I sat there for a while, watching birds skim the surface. The water was clear but dark near the bottom, and I could see old tree limbs under the surface. I saw no boats, no cabins across the water, nothing to show anyone else had been here in a long time. That night, I started hearing things I couldn't explain so easily. Around midnight, I heard what sounded like something walking around the cabin. Not small animals, heavy footsteps, slow and steady. I lay still in bed, listening. There was no electricity, so the only light was from my flashlight and the moon outside. I didn't want to turn on the light. I didn't want to make any noise. I just listened. The steps came from the left side of the cabin, crunched through the leaves, paused, then continued around to the back. Then nothing. I stayed still a long time after that, barely breathing. I didn't hear the footsteps move away. They just stopped. I didn't know if it was someone or something. Eventually, I fell asleep from sheer exhaustion. The next morning, I looked around the outside of the cabin. The leaves and dirt were scattered all over, so any tracks would have been hard to find even in good light. I didn't see anything obvious. No broken branches, no trash, nothing. I told myself it might have been a deer, maybe a bear. Still, I kept my knife in my pocket the rest of the day, even inside. That afternoon, I went farther down the trail past the lake, just to stretch my legs. I found a clearing that looked like it had once been used for camping, maybe years ago. Rusted metal remnants of a fire ring, old beer cans, and some weathered boards. No signs of life now, just silence and insects. I stayed there maybe 20 minutes before heading back. When I came back to the cabin, something was different. The door was open. I stopped in my tracks. I knew I'd closed it. I remembered clearly pushing it shut and checking the latch. I approached slowly. The inside looked untouched. My bag was still where I left it. My food, the books, everything looked normal. But that door, it was wide open, like someone had walked right in and left it that way. I checked every inch of the cabin. No one inside. No signs of forced entry. The lock was just a sliding bolt. Not even locked when I left because it didn't feel necessary. That was on me. From then on, I kept that bolt slid shut anytime I was inside. That night was the worst. I just started to drift off when I heard a sound that jolted me upright. 3 distinct knocks on the wall outside. Not on the door. On the side of the cabin, near the window by the bed. Knock, knock, knock. Then silence. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. My flashlight was within reach, but I didn't want to turn it on. I just listened, every hair on my body standing up. More footsteps. Then the back of the cabin creaked. Something or someone pressing against it. Then nothing. This time I didn't fall asleep. I sat up with my knife in my lap, flashlight in my hand, eyes locked on the door. I didn't hear anything else the rest of the night, but I never felt alone again. I made up my mind to leave in the morning. To first light, I packed everything fast. My backpack was already mostly ready. I threw on my boots, grabbed the food, the flashlight, everything, and stepped outside. The air was cold and damp. I could see my breath even though it was spring. And then I saw them, footprints. Not boots, not hooves, bare feet, naked human feet, pressed deep into the mud and pine needles around the side of the cabin. Too big for a child, too small for a grown man. And recent. I counted at least 6 or 7 prints before they disappeared into the underbrush. No shoes. Who the hell was out here barefoot? I didn't want to know. I got in my car, turned the key, and nothing. The engine clicked but didn't turn over. Again, nothing. My car had never had battery issues. It wasn't new, but I'd had it serviced right before the trip. I popped the hood, checked what I could, which wasn't much. Everything looked normal. No frayed wires, no loose battery connection. I don't know enough about engines to diagnose anything, but it made no sense. It was like the battery was dead, but I hadn't left anything on. I tried to calm myself down, told myself it was just bad luck. I had a battery-powered radio in my pack and a phone. No service, but I figured if I hiked far enough back toward the main road, I could call for help. I left a note in the cabin, just in case, saying I'd gone to find help and would come back. I didn't make it far. About 2 miles down the dirt road, I saw something that made my blood go cold. A pair of tire tracks pulling off the road into the woods. Fresh ones, deep, clear, and recent. I stopped and looked, and maybe 50 feet in, almost hidden behind the trees, was an old white van. No markings, no plates, just parked there. I backed away slowly and got off the road. I moved through the trees, trying to circle wide around it, not making a sound. My heart was pounding so hard it hurt. The van's windows were blacked out. I couldn't see anyone inside. I didn't want to get closer. I kept walking through the woods, staying off the road. I moved slowly and stopped often, listening for any sounds behind me. A few times I thought I heard branches snap, but it could have been anything. Could have been me stepping on a twig. Could have been something else. I hiked for hours. No phone service, no cars, no houses. I didn't even know if I was still going the right way. Eventually, I found an old logging road and followed it until I hit pavement. Maybe 5 miles later, I flagged down a truck. The guy inside looked at me like I'd crawled out of the earth. I probably looked like it too, muddy, pale, shaking. I told him my car broke down and I needed a ride into town. He took me without asking anything. When I got back, I filed a report. I gave the sheriff everything: location of the cabin, the white van, the barefoot prints. I told them everything that happened. They said they'd look into it. I never heard back. I called the cabin owner the next day, using a friend's phone. No answer. The listing disappeared a few days later. I don't know who was out there. I don't know what they wanted. But I know I wasn't supposed to see them. I know that if my car hadn't broken down, If I had tried to... I needed a break. I'd been running on fumes for months, working long hours, barely sleeping, always behind. It felt like I was falling apart, so I decided to take a week off work and get out of the city. A buddy of mine mentioned a small cabin in the woods a few hours north, near a lake. It belonged to his uncle who had passed a few years ago. It was sitting empty, quiet, and free. I didn't think twice. I packed some gear, bought groceries, filled my tank, and left that Friday morning. The drive was uneventful for the first couple hours. Once I got off the highway and started winding through back roads, I started to feel like I was actually getting away. The roads got narrower, trees pressed in on both sides, and cell service dropped off completely. I wasn't worried. I had the GPS saved offline, and I had printed directions just in case. It was late afternoon when I reached the cabin. It looked exactly like you'd expect. One story with siding faded gray, a small porch out front with 2 rotting chairs, and a screen door hanging half off its hinges. It sat in a clearing just off a gravel road, maybe 50 yards from a lake. There were no other cabins in sight, just trees, miles of them. It was perfect. I unlocked the place with the old key my buddy had mailed me. The inside smelled like dust and old wood. It was musty but not terrible. The layout was simple. Main room with a couch and a wood stove, a small kitchen off to one side, a narrow hallway that led to a bathroom and a single bedroom. No TV, no Wi-Fi. The power worked, though the lights flickered a bit. I unpacked my gear and settled in. That first night was peaceful. I made a fire in the wood stove, cooked some pasta, read an old book I brought with me, and fell asleep by 10. The quiet was deeper than anything I'd experienced in years. No cars, no sirens, no neighbors, just the sound of wind in the trees and the occasional creak of the cabin settling. The next morning, I made coffee on the little propane stove and sat on the porch for a long time, staring at the lake. I couldn't remember the last time I felt that relaxed. I didn't even check my phone, knowing it would just be dead air. Later that day, I took a long walk along a trail behind the cabin. It led into the woods, winding deeper than I expected. I didn't bring a compass or a map, which was dumb in hindsight, but I followed the trail until it looped back around to the cabin about an hour later. There were signs of old activity. Chopped wood, rusted cans, bits of rope, but nothing fresh. It felt like no one had been there in years. The second night was when things started to feel off. I couldn't put my finger on it at first. I had just gotten into bed when I heard a noise outside, a sharp crack, like a branch snapping, then another, not close but not far either. I told myself it was just wildlife, deer, maybe a raccoon. Still, I sat up in bed and listened. For a while, there was nothing. Then, footsteps, crunching, slow, careful. I got up and turned off the bedroom light, stood by the window, and peered through the curtain. The front yard was dark. The moon was behind clouds. I couldn't see anything, but the footsteps were still there, closer now. Then they stopped. Just silence. I stood frozen for at least 5 minutes, my ears straining. Nothing. I eventually climbed back into bed, telling myself again it was just an animal. The woods are full of noises. I was just jumpy from being alone. But I didn't sleep well. I kept waking up, heart racing, listening for sounds. In the morning, I walked the yard. The grass was damp from dew. I didn't see any tracks, but the dirt was dry in some spots and too soft in others. I looked around the edge of the woods but didn't see anything unusual. Still, I felt watched, like something had been out there. I shrugged it off and went back inside. Day 3 was uneventful. I fished at the lake, read more, sat in the sun. But I noticed I kept glancing at the tree line, checking the shadows. Something had shifted in my head. I didn't feel fully at ease anymore. I skipped the walk that day and double-checked that I locked the cabin door before bed. That night, I woke up again to noises. This time, it wasn't just footsteps. I heard something scrape the side of the cabin, like metal on wood. Then a soft knock, just once. Not at the door, maybe on the wall, couldn't tell. I sat up again, heart hammering. I didn't move for a long time. Then came a second knock. Still not at the door. Just a knock on the outer wall, soft but deliberate. I got up slowly and crept to the front of the cabin. I didn't turn on any lights. I peeked through the curtain by the door. Nothing. Black trees. Windless night. I thought about opening the door, stepping onto the porch with my flashlight. But something in me said no. Don't do that. Just wait. So I stood there, motionless, for what felt like an hour. No more sounds. I went back to bed, didn't sleep at all. The next morning, I walked the perimeter of the cabin, and there it was, a thin line scratched into the wall, like someone had dragged a knife or a nail along the siding. The scratch was long and fresh, the wood still pale where the surface had been stripped. It started near the front window and ended at the back corner. I didn't know what to think. A prank? A hunter? Someone passing through? I didn't see tire tracks or footprints. I told myself it must have been old damage I just hadn't noticed. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. Still, I didn't leave. I should have. But I'd told people I'd be gone all week. I didn't want to look paranoid. So I stayed. Kept to the cabin most of the day. Didn't fish. Didn't walk. Just watched the woods. That night, I made sure all the windows were locked. I even pushed a chair under the doorknob like some kind of makeshift barricade. I slept with a knife by the bed. At 2:14 a.m., I checked the time. I woke to a sound I'll never forget. The unmistakable creak of the front porch. Slow. Weight shifting. Someone was walking on it. Step, step, step. Then a pause. Then a thump, like something being dropped. I couldn't move. I lay there, frozen, barely breathing. Then the doorknob rattled. Not violently, just a soft, careful test, like they were checking if it was locked. Then silence. I stayed in bed until the sky began to lighten. When I finally got up and opened the door, I found something sitting on the porch, a dead rabbit. His head was missing. His body was clean, like it had been placed there. No blood, just left for me. That broke me. I packed my gear as fast as I could. I didn't even eat. I threw everything into the back of my car. Didn't care how messy it was. I locked the cabin behind me, like that mattered, and drove out. The dirt road felt longer this time. The trees tighter. I kept checking the mirror. Nothing followed me, but my stomach was in knots the whole way. I didn't feel calm until I saw the highway again. Back home, I told my buddy something had come up and I had to leave early. I didn't go into detail. I didn't want to sound crazy, but I couldn't shake it. For weeks, I kept checking my locks, looking outside when I heard a noise, watching for anything strange. 2 weeks after I got back, I received a letter in the mail. No return address, just my name. Inside was a photo, a grainy shot of the cabin at night, taken from the woods. My car was in the driveway. The lights were off. I don't know when it was taken. That's when I knew it wasn't just someone passing through. Someone had been watching me the whole time. They knew I was alone. They knew I wouldn't fight. They wanted me to know they were there. I moved to a different apartment not long after. Changed my number. Got a new job. I haven't gone camping or stayed in a cabin since. I don't even like going outside at night. That week was supposed to be a break from stress, a reset. Instead, it showed me something I wish I didn't know, that some people somewhere enjoy being the thing others are afraid of. They don't want to hurt you fast. They want you to feel it coming, slowly, quietly, helplessly. And the worst part is, I still don't know who they were, or if they ever really left. I had been renting cabins for short breaks from work for a couple of years. Living in a busy city and dealing with constant deadlines, noise, and traffic had started wearing me down. I never liked resorts or hotels. I didn't care about room service or jacuzzis. I wanted isolation, complete silence, maybe some trees and a lake nearby. Just a few days where I could unplug and not see another person. That's how I found this one cabin, somewhere in the northern part of the state. I found it listed on a small vacation rental site that didn't look very popular. The pictures looked decent. Small wooden cabin, surrounded by dense woods, with a short path leading to a lake. There were no reviews and the host had a generic name, but I didn't think much of it. The price was cheap, and it said I'd have the entire place to myself. That was all I needed to hear. I booked it for 5 nights in early spring. The weather was still cool, but the snow was mostly melted, and I figured the bugs wouldn't be too bad yet. I packed light clothes, a few dry foods, a knife, a flashlight, a battery pack, and my old hiking boots. I didn't bring much tech other than my phone. No laptop, no tablet. I wanted to cut myself off completely. The drive up took almost 6 hours, most of it through rural back roads and dirt trails that hadn't been maintained in a while. I lost cell signal about 20 minutes before I reached the place. That was fine. I was used to that in remote spots. I had downloaded the offline map and saved the directions. When I reached the cabin, it was exactly like the pictures. Just a small box made of dark wood, sitting alone in a clearing, surrounded by tall trees. The road I came in on stopped about 20 yards from the porch and ended in a small, muddy turnoff. There were no other structures in sight. No people, no cars, just woods on every side, thick and quiet. It was perfect. I unlocked the door with the code the host sent me and stepped inside. The place was clean but bare. One room with a bed against the back wall, a little table and chair, a small wood stove, and a kitchenette with an old sink and a 2-burner stove. There was a shelf with a few books and some candles. No TV, no radio, no router, not even a clock. I liked that. The first day passed quietly. I walked to the lake and sat by the edge, watching the breeze ripple the water. I saw a few squirrels and birds, nothing unusual. I cooked rice and beans for dinner and sat on the porch as the sun dropped behind the trees. It got cold fast, so I started a small fire in the stove and settled into bed early. That first night was the kind of silence you only find deep in the woods. It was so quiet that I could hear my own heartbeat when I lay still. I slept deeper than I had in weeks. The second day, I woke up at dawn. The sun cut through the trees in thin strips, and I could hear something scuttling on the roof. Maybe a raccoon or bird. I drank instant coffee and ate trail mix for breakfast. Then I followed a narrow trail that wound past the lake and disappeared into the forest. I walked for over an hour, never seeing any sign of other people. No houses, no paths, not even trash. The trees were tall and close together, the ground was muddy in places, and my boots sank a few times. I turned back eventually and made it to the cabin by early afternoon. I was sweaty and my legs were sore, but I felt relaxed in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. That night, I started noticing small things that didn't feel right. Not dangerous, just off. First, I noticed the back window was unlocked. I was pretty sure I had checked all the windows when I got in. I made a habit of doing that in rentals, but I figured maybe I missed one. No big deal. I locked it and moved on. Later, I saw footprints in the muddy ground near the side of the cabin. At first, I thought they were mine from earlier, but they didn't line up. They were smaller and coming from the opposite direction. They weren't animal prints either, they were boot prints. Adult-sized. I crouched down and studied them for a minute. They weren't fresh, maybe from the day before. I tried to convince myself they were left by someone who came to clean the place before I arrived. Maybe someone checked on it recently. Still, it bothered me enough to walk a wide circle around the cabin before sunset. I didn't see anything or anyone. That night, I had trouble sleeping. Every small creak and gust of wind made me sit up and listen. The trees swayed outside, and shadows moved across the ceiling. I didn't have a weapon, just the knife I used to open cans, but I kept it close. The third day was cold, cloudy, windy. I didn't leave the cabin much. I read for a while, tried writing in a journal, cooked some oats, but I kept glancing toward the windows. Around midday, I saw something that stopped me cold. There was a figure far out in the woods, standing still. I noticed it while looking out the kitchen window. It was hard to make out, just a dark shape between the trees. At first I thought it was a tree stump, but it was too tall and narrow. I watched it for a long time. It didn't move. Then I blinked, and it was gone. I told myself it was nothing, a shadow, a trick of the light, but I knew what I saw. After that, I didn't go outside again that day. That night, something tapped the glass of the back window. Not loud, just one sharp tap like a fingernail. Then silence. I held still in bed, barely breathing. I waited for another sound, but nothing came. I eventually got up and crept to the window. I didn't turn on any lights. I just peeked through the curtain. There was nothing there, just trees and darkness. But when I checked in the morning, there was a single fingerprint smudged on the outside of the glass. Long and thin, like someone had leaned in and touched it gently. Just one. The fourth day, I was paranoid. I walked the area around the cabin again. I looked for tracks. I found more boot prints near the back, pressed into the soft ground behind the cabin. This time, they were fresh. I could see the tread pattern clearly. Same size, same shape. Someone had been there. I wasn't imagining it. I wanted to leave. I really did. But I didn't have cell signal, and the drive back through the woods would take hours. The cabin still felt safer than the road somehow. At least there I had walls. A knife. A lock. It wasn't much, but it was something. That night, I barricaded the door with the chair and pushed the little table in front of the back window. I didn't light a fire. I didn't want to cast shadows or draw attention. I lay in bed in full clothes, clutching the knife. I didn't sleep. Around 2 a.m., I heard someone walking outside. Slow, steady steps. They circled the cabin once, then stopped near the back window. I could hear breathing. Not loud, not panting, just steady, calm breathing. Then they tapped the glass again. Just once. Deliberate. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I lay in bed like a corpse. Eventually, the sound of footsteps faded into the woods. When daylight came, I ran outside with my knife and circled the cabin. Nothing was there, but this time the fingerprint wasn't alone. There were several now, a whole hand, pressed flat against the glass. I packed my things, threw everything in my bag without folding or sorting. I didn't care anymore. I just wanted out. I got in my car and drove back down the dirt path, fast. The road was bumpy and I hit a rock that scraped the underside, but I didn't stop. It took over an hour to get to a place with signal. When I finally got bars, I pulled over and called the rental number. It rang and rang. No answer. I left a message, told them someone had been stalking the cabin, that I didn't feel safe, that they needed to report it. I never got a call back. I checked the site where I found the listing. It was gone. Not just the listing, the entire profile. It was like it had never existed. I didn't go home right away. I booked a motel in the nearest town and stayed there for 2 nights. I didn't sleep well. I kept the lights on and a chair against the door. I kept checking the lot to make sure no one was following me. Eventually, I went home. I changed my number. I stopped booking remote cabins. I still go on trips now and then, but only to places with cameras, reception, and neighbors. I don't trust silence anymore. I don't trust empty woods. I still don't know who it was. I don't know if it was the host, a squatter, a hunter, or just some lunatic who lived in those woods. I'll never know. But I know they watched me. I know they came close. I know they could have come in if they wanted to, but they didn't. They wanted me to know they were there. That was the whole point. And that's what scares me more than anything else. Because people like that don't want to kill you. They want you to live with the memory of them. I drove up to the cabin in the late afternoon. The road narrowed for the last 20 minutes, going from gravel to uneven dirt, and I had to slow to a crawl to keep from bottoming out my car. I hadn't expected it to be so remote, but that was part of the appeal. After months of work stress and one too many nights spent staring at my ceiling until the sun rose, I needed out. Not just from the city, from everything. The cabin belonged to a guy I knew through a coworker. I never met him, just exchanged a couple emails. He said it was rustic and way off-grid, which turned out to be his way of saying it hadn't been touched in years. The paint on the outside was peeling, the front steps sagged in the middle, and the air smelled like damp pine and mouse droppings. But it was quiet, dead quiet, and that's what I was after. I unpacked the car, set up the cot inside with my sleeping bag, and stacked the canned food I'd brought on the rickety shelf in the kitchen area. There was no electricity, no cell signal, no running water, just a hand pump out back. I found a box of old candles and a few half-empty propane canisters under the counter. The windows were dusty but unbroken. The place had held up better than I thought. That first night, I built a small fire in the fireplace and read by candlelight until the flames died down. I didn't notice how dark it got outside until I went to the outhouse. The trees surrounded the cabin tightly, and once the sun dipped below the horizon, they swallowed all the light. No stars, no moon, just blackness. It felt like the forest leaned in close at night, like it was listening. The next morning I woke early. The stillness was strange. In the city, there's always some kind of hum. Traffic, voices, radios playing from open windows. Out here, the silence was total. I kept waiting for a bird to chirp or a squirrel to scurry past the window, but there was nothing. It felt unnatural. I spent the day hiking a little, collecting firewood, and fixing a small hole in the cabin wall with duct tape and a scrap of tarp I'd brought. By dusk, I was tired, and I thought that was a good thing. I figured I'd sleep better. I didn't. I woke up around 3 a.m., not to a noise, but because of the lack of one. It's hard to explain, but when you're alone in the woods and you suddenly feel watched, you wake up. My skin was prickling. I lay there in my bag, trying to convince myself it was just the weird quiet. Then I heard something. It was faint but close. The sound of someone stepping on dry leaves, careful but real. I sat up slowly and waited, heart racing, breath shallow. The steps stopped. I didn't move for an hour. Eventually, I lay back down, but I didn't sleep. The next day, I looked around the cabin for any signs of someone being nearby. Boot prints, garbage, anything. But the ground was covered in needles and old leaves, and I couldn't tell what was new or not. I chalked it up to my mind playing tricks on me. Still, I started being more cautious. I made sure the doors were locked. I kept my hatchet nearby. I stopped going far from the cabin. On the fourth night, I saw him. I had gone out to relieve myself just before bed. The flashlight was getting weak, so I made it quick and turned back toward the cabin. That's when I noticed something at the tree line. Far back, beyond where the light could fully reach. A shape, person, just standing there. Not moving, not hiding, just standing. I froze. For maybe 10 seconds, I didn't breathe. Then I flicked the light up toward him, and he was gone. I didn't sleep that night. I sat up by the fireplace, every candle I had lit, holding the hatchet and listening for sounds. I kept looking out the windows, waiting to see that shape again. Nothing. The next day, I considered leaving, but the thought of driving back down that rough road in the dark stopped me. I told myself maybe it was a tree I imagined into a man. That made sense. Kind of. Still, I kept the hatchet close. That night, I pushed one of the wooden dressers against the front door. I know how that sounds, but it gave me a little peace of mind. At around 1 a.m., I heard scratching. Not loud, not the kind you'd hear in a horror movie. Just this subtle dragging sound, like someone dragging their fingernails along the outside wall. Then it moved toward the back. I held my breath and stood quietly. It circled the cabin. I stood in the center of the room, listening. I thought about turning off the candles so I wouldn't be seen from outside, but I couldn't bring myself to blow them out. Eventually, it stopped. The next morning, I found boot prints near the hand pump out back. They were clear, not mine. The toes pointed toward the pump. Someone had stood there watching the cabin. They weren't fresh, but they weren't more than a day old. I decided to leave. Immediately, I packed up everything, fast, and shoved it into the car. I took one last sweep inside to make sure I hadn't forgotten anything. That's when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. There was a smear of mud on the inside of the kitchen window. Not outside, inside. I had never opened that window. It was stuck shut. I checked the frame, still locked. But there it was. A smear, like someone had pressed their dirty hand there. It was dry, faint, but unmistakable. I left without looking back. The car bounced down the dirt road, and I didn't care about the suspension. I just wanted to get out. I drove straight home. No stops. The weirdest thing, when I got home and opened my backpack to unpack, I found something I hadn't packed. A single pine cone, wrapped tightly in what looked like an old piece of cloth. Dirty, moldy. I dropped it immediately and threw it out. I don't know who was out there. I don't know if they meant to hurt me or were just trying to scare me. Maybe it was a squatter. maybe someone unwell, but someone had been watching me. Since then, I've had trouble sleeping. Every time I hear a creak or a soft sound at night, I'm back in that cabin, staring into the trees. I keep checking the locks, checking the windows, because sometimes I still feel like I'm being watched. And I never figured out how that mud got inside the kitchen window. I needed to get away from everything. It wasn't a dramatic decision, more like a slow build-up over time. Work had worn me thin. My apartment felt smaller by the week. I was always online, always reachable, always tethered to something. One morning, I just opened my laptop, stared at the screen, and closed it again. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I just packed some clothes, gear, and food, filled the tank, and drove west. I found the cabin online weeks earlier, on a forum where people shared off-grid properties they didn't mind others using. It was listed by some guy who hadn't posted in over a year. Just a couple of photos. A wooden structure surrounded by pines, no nearby roads visible, a short caption about how it had no power, no plumbing, and no phone service. That suited me fine. Getting there was rough. The dirt road leading to it hadn't been maintained in years. My tires slid in patches of mud, and tree branches slapped against the windows as I crept along at 10 miles per hour. By the time I reached the clearing, the sun had dropped behind the trees. The cabin looked older than in the pictures, like it had been aging faster than it should have. The front steps were crooked. One of the shutters hung loose, but it was standing, and that was good enough. Inside, it was one room, with stove in the corner, a cot against one wall, and a counter with some shelves for supplies. There was an old water pump out back and an outhouse about 20 yards into the trees. I unloaded my bags, lit a few candles I'd brought, and made a meal out of crackers and canned beans. Then I just sat there in the silence. It was strange at first. No cars, no voices, no hum from electronics. Just the wind moving through the trees and the occasional crack from the wooden walls settling. The first night was cold, but not bad. I kept a fire going in the stove and burrowed into my sleeping bag. I fell asleep fast, probably from the long drive. The next few days were quiet. I walked the woods, gathered firewood, kept a little journal. I read a book I'd brought, drank instant coffee, and watched the sun move through the trees. It was peaceful. The only odd thing was how empty the woods felt. I didn't see a single animal. Not a squirrel, not a bird. I thought maybe it was just the season. By the fourth night, I'd settled into a routine. I cooked a hot meal on a small gas burner, sat by the stove with a candle, and wrote in my journal. I noticed I'd been feeling watched. Not in a spooky way at first, just aware that my back was often to a window. I kept glancing over my shoulder. Felt stupid, but I started drawing the curtains at night. The next morning, I found boot prints behind the cabin. They were clear, big, not mine. They came from the trees and stopped near the back window. No sign of turning around, just ended there. I stood there for a while, looking at them. My first thought was that a hunter or hiker came through, but the tracks didn't pass by. They came to the cabin and stopped. That day, I kept closer to the cabin. I didn't go hiking. I stayed within sight of the door. I kept the hatchet nearby. That night, I locked the door. There was no real lock, just a wooden bar that slid into place. I pushed a chair under the handle too. I barely slept. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to the sound of something tapping. Not loud, just a soft, steady tap. Tap, 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 came from the back wall. I held still, listening. It went on for about a minute, then stopped. I stayed awake the rest of the night. The next day, I found nothing. No new tracks, no sign anyone had been there. I told myself maybe a branch had come loose and tapped the wall. Maybe a woodpecker. I tried to believe that, but I started noticing small things. My firewood pile looked a little different, like some logs had been taken. My lantern wasn't where I left it. Once, the outhouse door was swinging open when I knew I'd closed it. Each thing was small, easy to explain, but they added up. That night, I built up the fire, kept my flashlight close, and didn't sleep at all. I sat there, back against the wall, staring at the door. Around 3 a.m., I heard movement outside, leaves crunching, then nothing, then more movement, a creak from the porch. I held the hatchet tight. My heart pounded so loud I thought whoever was out there could hear it. The door didn't open. Nothing came through the window, but I knew someone was out there. At dawn, I opened the door. The firewood pile was scattered. My backpack was unzipped, and the food was gone. Whoever it was hadn't taken anything else, just the food. I packed everything, fast. I loaded the car, started it, and turned around on the narrow path. I didn't stop until I was back on paved road. When I got home, I checked the forum where I found the listing. The user who posted it was gone. Account deleted. No other posts. I searched the property's location. No records. No name tied to it. I still think about it. Whoever was out there wasn't trying to hurt me. At least not right away. They watched, took food, moved things around. They wanted me to know they were there. They wanted me scared. It worked. I haven't been in the woods since. It was the kind of plan that sounded better in my head than it ever did in reality. I had taken time off work, booked a week in a remote cabin 2 states over, and told myself I was going to disconnect from everything for a while. No emails, no texts, no calls. Just me, the trees, some firewood, and a stack of paperbacks I never had the time to get to. That was the idea, anyway. I found the cabin through a private rental site. It was deep in the mountains, on a patch of private land about 5 miles off a dirt service road that itself was a good 20 miles from the nearest town. No neighbors, no internet, no cell service. The photos made it look rustic but solid: timber walls, a cast iron stove, simple kitchen, a bedroom loft up top. There was a well outside with a hand pump, a composting toilet in a small shed off the back, and a storage box full of cut wood near the porch. It had everything I thought I needed. I left on a Monday morning. My car was loaded with enough groceries to last at least 10 days, plus a big 5-gallon jug of water just in case the well was dry. I brought matches, lighters, candles, 2 lanterns, a hunting knife I barely knew how to use, and my old .22 rifle with a box of shells, mostly for comfort. I wasn't expecting trouble, but being alone that far out, I figured better safe than sorry. The drive was long and winding, especially once I left the main highway. The 2-lane road curved through thick forest for nearly an hour before turning into a gravel path that snaked up a series of hills. It was early spring, still cold in the mornings, and I passed several patches of snow clinging to the shadows on the way up. By the time I reached the dirt trail that led to the cabin, the sun was already dipping low, and I had to drive slow to avoid the ruts and rocks. I found the cabin just past a bend in the trail. It sat in a small clearing, the tree line pressing in on all sides like it was being watched. The roof was mossy, the front steps worn smooth, but it looked solid enough. There was no one around. Not that I expected anyone, but the silence felt heavy in a way I couldn't quite explain. I shrugged it off as travel nerves. I unpacked slowly, bringing in my bags and food first, then setting up the lanterns. The sun dropped quickly once it hit the trees. I fired up the wood stove, which took some effort. I hadn't done it in years, and by the time I got a steady flame going, the air inside was already freezing. I left my jacket on for a while. The cabin was even more basic than it looked in the pictures. 1 room on the bottom with a small kitchen counter, a narrow table, and a couple of chairs. A ladder led up to the loft, which had just enough space for a bed and a wooden trunk at the foot. There were a few hooks in the walls, and someone had left a wool blanket draped over the back of a chair. No electricity, no plumbing beyond the well and toilet shed. The windows were small and set high into the walls. The front door had a bolt, but it looked older than I liked. That first night passed quietly. I made a small dinner, beans and rice on a portable camp stove, read a few chapters of an old novel, and went to bed before 10. I remember lying there under the blankets, staring up at the dark roof beams, listening to the soft pop of the fire in the stove downstairs. The silence outside was total. No crickets, no wind, just the kind of thick quiet that makes your ears ring. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up with the feeling that something wasn't right. I didn't hear anything at first, but the hairs on my arms were standing up. I stayed still, holding my breath, Then I heard a crunch, dry leaves, close to the cabin. A single, deliberate step. Then nothing. I sat up slowly. I hadn't locked the rifle away yet. It was still leaning against the side of the bed. I reached for it and crept down the ladder without making a sound. The fire had died out to red embers. The room was dark. I moved to the front window, trying to see out, but all I could make out was my own reflection in the glass. Another crunch, then 2 more steps. Whatever it was walking around the side of the cabin. I held the rifle tight but didn't lift it yet. I didn't want to shoot a deer or a bear by mistake. I crouched down and waited. A long minute passed, then nothing. I stayed on the floor for another half hour, trying to listen past the ringing in my ears, but it was quiet again. No footsteps, no animals, nothing. Eventually I climbed back into bed, but I didn't sleep. The next morning was cold and gray. I went outside and looked for tracks. The ground was still soft from melted snow, and it didn't take long to find boot prints circling the cabin. They weren't mine. Too wide, too long. Someone had walked around the entire building, pausing outside the front and back doors. No other prints led away from them. I followed them out to the edge of the clearing, but they vanished into the trees. I stood there for a while, scanning the woods. I couldn't see anyone, but it was like the trees were watching me. I went back inside and bolted the door. The next few days passed in a kind of uneasy rhythm. I tried to stick to my plan, reading, cooking, chopping a little wood, but I couldn't relax. I kept checking the windows, listening for sounds outside. I stopped going to the toilet shed after dark and started using a bucket inside instead. Every night, I made sure the rifle was within reach. On the 4th day, I found a piece of string tied to the handle of the well pump. A short length of blue nylon cord, tied tight in a knot I didn't know. I hadn't brought any rope like that. I untied it and tossed it away, trying to tell myself it was nothing. Maybe someone else had stayed there before me and left it behind. Maybe a bird dropped it, but it felt wrong. That night, I lit both lanterns and left them burning until the fuel ran low. I stayed awake as long as I could, then drifted off sometime after 3. I woke up to the sound of knocking. Not banging, not pounding. Just a slow, deliberate knock. 3 soft taps, then silence. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Another knock, then 3 more. I sat up slowly, my hand already on the rifle. The lanterns had burned out. The room was pitch black. I couldn't tell where the knocking was coming from. It sounded like the back wall, near the kitchen. Then it moved to the side wall. Then the front door. I didn't speak, didn't make a sound. Just sat there, heart pounding so loud I was sure they could hear it. Then the knocking stopped. I waited. I stayed there until the sun came up. In the morning, I checked outside again. More boot prints. More than one set this time. At least 2 different sizes. They had circled the cabin again, and this time there were scratches on the wood near the back door. Deep gouges, as if someone had dragged a rock or knife across the boards. No other signs, just tracks that led back into the woods and vanished. I made a decision then. I packed my things. I didn't even eat breakfast. I loaded the car and drove. Fast. I didn't stop until I hit the paved road, and I didn't stop after that either. I just kept driving. When I got home, I didn't tell anyone the full story. Just said I cut the trip short because of the weather. I didn't want to sound crazy. A few weeks later, I got a call from the owner of the cabin. He said he found the door broken in and the place ransacked. Furniture smashed, drawers emptied, walls spray painted. I told him I hadn't touched anything. He didn't press me, just said thanks and hung up. That was a year ago. I still think about it. Still see that knot of blue cord in my dreams. Still remember the sound of footsteps outside my window. I don't go into the woods alone anymore, and I never stay in cabins. Not ever again. I needed a break. That's how it started. Nothing special, just regular life piling up. Work stress, emails I didn't answer fast enough, bills stacking up on the kitchen table, noisy neighbors, all of it. I'd been staring at my computer screen so long some days I forgot the date. I wasn't eating right, wasn't sleeping right, and every little thing was starting to feel like too much. So when a friend mentioned his cousin had an old cabin sitting and used out in the woods, I jumped at the chance. Said he hadn't been up there in a while, but the place was still solid. Off the grid, middle of nowhere, no internet, no reception. Just a wood stove, a shed full of tools, and a lake about 5 minutes away. It sounded like exactly what I needed. I packed enough for a week. Canned food, some dry snacks, bottled water, a sleeping bag, basic tools, flashlight, lantern, extra batteries, and a portable power bank just in case. I didn't tell many people I was going. I wasn't trying to make it a thing. I just needed to get away. The drive was long. Almost 7 hours of mostly back roads and narrow, winding routes that made the last 2 hours feel like 10. The pavement disappeared eventually, replaced by a gravel road with deep ruts and patches of standing water. Trees closed in on both sides like a tunnel, the sunlight filtering through in broken patches. I passed one other vehicle on the way in, a beat-up old truck with an empty gun rack, and then nothing else for miles. I finally reached the cabin just before dark. It sat in a small clearing at the end of a narrow trail that barely looked drivable. One room, a slanted tin roof, dark with siding stained from years of rain and sun, and a front porch that looked like it had seen better days. There was a single window in front and another on the left side. No curtains, no shutters, just old glass that had gone a little foggy over the years. I parked a little ways off and walked the last 30 feet just to stretch my legs. The air smelled clean, pine, damp earth, and a bit of smoke from somewhere, though I figured it was just my truck's exhaust hanging in the still air. It was quiet, not silent, but alive in a different way than the city. Wind in the trees, bugs, maybe a bird every now and then, but no cars, no voices, no hum of machinery, just forest. Inside, the cabin was about what I expected. A single room with a wood stove in the corner, a table with 2 mismatched chairs, some built-in shelves full of odds and ends, half-used candles, old paperbacks, a deck of cards missing the King of Hearts. There was a metal-framed cot with a thin mattress and a couple wool blankets folded on top. A small cabinet had pots, a few utensils, and an old can opener. The floor was uneven and creaked when you walked, and the air inside had that dry, musty smell that comes from wood left alone too long. There was an outhouse about 50 yards out behind the cabin, and a hand pump near a moss-covered well next to the shed. I tested the pump and it worked, though the water came out rusty at first and then cleared after a few seconds. I filled a bucket and brought it inside, then set up my sleeping bag on the cot and started a fire in the stove. That first night was uneventful. I ate a cold can of chili, sat on the porch for a while with a flashlight, then went inside when the cold started to settle in. I read a few pages from one of the books on the shelf, some wilderness survival guide from the 80s, then fell asleep with my coat still on. The fire burned low in the stove, casting weak orange light across the walls, and the wind rattled the tin roof once or twice. I didn't sleep well, not because of fear or noise, but just that kind of restless energy you get in a new place. I woke up around 2 a.m. to silence. The fire was down to coals, and the air had gone cold. I pulled the blanket tighter and stared at the ceiling until I fell asleep again. The next morning, I woke up around 7. It was colder than I expected. I could see my breath. I got the fire going again, made some instant coffee with boiled water, and stepped outside to warm up. Everything was damp with dew. The trees creaked in the breeze and birds chirped in short bursts before going quiet again. I walked down the trail toward the lake. It was about 5 minutes, just like he said. The water was still, like glass, and a low mist hugged the surface. It looked untouched. No trash, no footprints, nothing. I sat for a while on a rock near the shore and listened. It was peaceful, but there was an odd feeling too. Not fear exactly, just an awareness, like I was being watched. I told myself it was the silence. My brain wasn't used to it. Back in the city, there was always a background noise, traffic, neighbors, music. Out here, every little sound stood out like a pin drop. On the way back, I noticed something small but strange. A crushed beer can on the edge of the trail. Old, rusted, and partially buried in dirt, but still, it wasn't from me. It didn't look like something left by my friend's cousin either. It just felt out of place. I spent most of the day chopping wood, reading, walking around, taking it easy. But that feeling didn't go away. The quiet was thick, not empty but heavy, like something was just out of view. That night, I woke up around midnight, not to a sound but to a feeling. The kind where you don't know why you woke up, but your body feels alert, like it knows something you don't. I sat up, rubbed my face, and listened. There was a soft thump from outside. It wasn't loud, not sharp, just a soft, quick sound, like something brushing against the porch. Then nothing. I stayed still for what felt like 20 minutes, ears straining. Nothing else came. I finally laid back down but didn't sleep much. When I got up at sunrise, I walked around the cabin. Nothing was disturbed. The firewood was stacked like I left it. The door was still locked from the inside, but I found a footprint in the dirt near the side of the shed. It wasn't mine. My boots had a waffle pattern. This one had a flat sole with a distinct circle in the heel, bigger than mine and deeper, fresh. I checked the shed. The padlock was still closed. I checked the pump, the path, even the woods. Nothing. The whole day I felt off. The trees looked darker than usual. The shadows stretched longer. I kept seeing movement out of the corner of my eye, small, fast, low to the ground, but every time I turned, there was nothing there. I told myself it was animals, squirrels, maybe a fox, but I kept the hatchet with me, and I brought the heavy flashlight even during the day. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed up with the lantern on low, sitting in the chair with the flashlight on my lap. I stared at the door. Nothing happened for hours. Then, sometime after 2 a.m., I heard it again. The thump, this time followed by a quiet creak of wood. Not loud, not sharp, just pressure. I stood up and walked to the window slowly. I didn't turn on the light. I crouched down and peered out. I saw a shape, person, standing near the shed, still, not moving. I froze. They didn't do anything. Didn't walk, didn't gesture. Just stood there for maybe 5 minutes. Long enough that I started to question whether I was even seeing it right. Then they stepped back into the trees and vanished. I stayed up until sunrise, checking the window every few minutes. Nothing came back. When it got light, I went out with the flashlight and a kitchen knife. Stupid, I know, but I didn't have much else. I looked for prints and found them, clear, fresh, same pattern as before. They led from the woods to the shed and then back again. No other sign of them. No note, no damage, no sound. That was the last night I stayed. I packed up everything and left before noon. I didn't care how far the drive was. I didn't care if I hit traffic or had to sleep in my car somewhere. I just wanted out of there. Back home, I spent a long time thinking about it, wondering what that person wanted, why they didn't knock, why they didn't try to talk or steal anything. Just watched, waited. Maybe they were hunting. Maybe they lived in those woods. Or maybe they saw me arrive and decided to see what I'd do. I don't know, and I'll never know. I didn't report it. What would I even say? That someone stood near my shed and didn't do anything? That I felt scared? The cabin's still up there, probably still sitting empty. I haven't asked about it, haven't told my friend, but I did get rid of the keys. I erased the GPS location from my phone. I made sure I couldn't accidentally go back even if I wanted to, because whoever was out there wasn't lost. They weren't surprised to see me. They knew I was coming. They knew where the shed was. They knew how to move without being heard. And I think if I had stayed one more night, I would have found out what they wanted.